Now I know why they put the wheelie bar on there. Oh, beautiful. Nice. Whoa, that is hammering. Hey, it's Vas here from Aussie RC Playground and welcome to my review of the ARRMA Typhon 3S BLX and the ARRMA Senton 3S BLX. I decided to do the review for both of these cars at the same time because, well, quite frankly, they share a lot of the same parts. They're actually based on the exact same chassis and they have the exact same power system, which is of course a 3660 3200 kV brushless motor paired up to a waterproof BLX 100 ESC, and of course up the front we have our standard waterproof steering servo from ARRMA. So without further ado, let's get stuck into this review. So kicking us off are of course the electrics, and for this one I gave these cars a 4 out of 5. Now keeping in mind that when I got these cars I actually got them with a different radio than you would get them today. I got these when they were still being supplied with the Tactic TTX 300. I got the cars roughly around the transition period when Hobbyco went under and Horizon Hobby took over, and at that time they were still shipping these cars out with the Tactic radio, which is of course a much loved radio that I know a lot of people out there are missing in the current line of ARRMA cars. So if it wasn't for the radio being swapped over, I probably would have given this a 5 out of 5 because I'm actually quite impressed with the electrics in these cars. They've actually lasted, performed very well. They lasted a really long time so far. I haven't had no issues with servos or motors or ESCs or anything like that. That being said, I will mention, although it didn't play a part in my scoring, but I will mention that there have been some batches of these cars, whether it be the Senton or the Typhon, where the motors, the bearings on the back of the motor has failed and the motor basically shatters inside. So there have been instances where that has happened, but thankfully that hasn't happened to me. So I really only took 1 point for the radio that is being supplied today, which is of course the Spectrum STX2. These radios, as I've said many times, are actually well featured. They do have, on paper, they look like the perfect radio for any RTR, but unfortunately the way that they feel and the way that they perform leaves something to be desired, and I have no doubt that ARRMA are working on a substitute, but for the time being we're going to have to deal with it, and that is why the scores are only a 4 out of 5 for the electrics. Moving on to the drivetrain, which is of course anything to do with gears and drive shafts and all that sort of thing. I actually haven't had any issues, however, I am still going to give this one a 4 out of 5, mainly because of the center drive shaft. I will give you a close-up of this because there's no point in me taking the bodies off and showing you all this as I'm talking to you, but the center drive shaft, and I've seen this happen with other people as well, where they can actually cut the drive shaft, where you get some rocks and pebbles and debris getting caught up in the back end of the chassis, and that can actually damage the drive shaft to the extent where it actually breaks off. It actually gets cut. Mine, as you can see, is showing some pretty heavy scarring, and I have no doubt that at some point I'm going to have to replace these drive shafts. I'm really hoping that ARRMA can come up with a solution to prevent this from happening in the future. I don't know what they could do here. Perhaps switching out to an aluminium drive shaft might help. I don't know, or maybe somebody out there can come up with some upgrades for these, maybe a cover of some sort. I really don't know what they could do here, but there is definitely a problem. What the solution is, I think, is yet to be seen. I know that the med scientists at ARRMA have been very good in fixing all these little sort of annoying things that we've come across whilst using these cars, and I have no doubt that they'll probably rectify that in the future. But it is just something to keep in mind that if you are going to drive these cars through gravel areas or anywhere where there's going to be rocks and things like that getting kicked up into the chassis, there's a good chance that you may damage your drive shaft. So it might pay to maybe keep an eye out on the car and don't run it for too long without checking it, especially if you're running in some pretty aggressive terrain. But aside from that, honestly, the plastic drive shafts that I thought were going to be a problem, so the front and rear plastic drive shafts, they have held up brilliantly. I take back my doubts. I remember when I got the cars, ARRMA was saying, you wait, you're not going to have any problems, and sure enough, I haven't. I haven't also had any problems with the diffs on these cars. I have heard of some people stripping out the spur gears in these because they do come with plastic spurs, but of course you can upgrade that to the 4S spur gear, which is steel, so that should solve that problem of stripping spur gears and so forth. So overall, I think the drivetrain in these cars is pretty fair. I haven't had any personal issues that I can really report back to you. I think the 1 point deduction is more of a precaution that there is room here for improvement. Even though I haven't technically had any failures, I can see where the potential is for some failures, and I've obviously heard about other people having issues. So yeah, I think there's a little bit of room for improvement. I didn't want to give this one full marks, but yeah, I think 4 out of 5 is a fair score in this case. Now we move on to handling, and handling, I have to say, the Typhon obviously handles a little bit nicer than the Senton because it is not as top heavy, but when you take the Senton into account and compare it to other trucks, as a basher vehicle, it actually does quite well. However, if you're trying to race with this truck, you may not have a great time. You may need to do some tuning. So just keep that in mind. These are advertised as bashing vehicles. They're not advertised as race vehicles, so I'm judging them as such. For the handling characteristics for both cars, I think it is very fair, and I've given a 4 out of 5 as well. The shocks actually performed quite well, albeit I do have one leaky shock on my Senton in this front right-hand corner. It's leaking quite badly, so I will need to pull that shock apart and rebuild it, refill it with oil as well, because as the truck has been sitting on the shelf, that shock has just started leaking for some odd reason. I have heard of these shocks leaking depending on batches, depending on cars. I myself, working in the hobby shop, have seen this as well with various cars that we've sold. We could sell 10 cars and not have a single issue, and then we sell 2 or 3 and all of a sudden they're leaky shocks. And it's kind of random. It's not really one particular car or one particular, if it's just the rear shocks or just the front, it's all over the place. I don't know what ARRMA can do to rectify that, but that's obviously in either the design of the shocks themselves or perhaps in the assembly section when they're putting everything together. But there needs to be a little bit of a tweak there to prevent this from happening, because overall the cars do perform quite well. The suspension tune is actually quite good. Tires on the Typhon, as you can see, I'm running the Badlands on here on some split 6 rims from Proline. These of course are not the original tires. The original tires are actually these ones, where have I put them, over here. Now, I actually don't mind the stock tires on the Typhon. I think they're actually a really good tire. Again, I would prefer that ARRMA would just give us slightly denser foams. Once you start using these cars, you will notice that the foams just, I don't know if they start falling apart or what the case is, but it feels like there's almost no foam in there after a while. Obviously there is, but it's barely there. So a slightly denser foam I think would help. That being said, there's also a bit of an issue with a lot of the rubber that ARRMA are using on their cars. Now, not every car is going to have this issue, and not everyone is going to have this issue, but ripping tires off wheels is not totally uncommon for ARRMA cars. They do have a lot of power. This one here, I can't blame the car entirely, because I actually geared it up with a 20-tooth pinion, where I was doing a speed run of about, I think, 94 kilometers an hour or something like that on 3S, which is very good. I mean, you got to admit, that's actually a really good speed for a car like this, especially given the money that you pay. But I took a bit of a jump off the curb. This was after I'd done the speed run, and the tires ballooned a little bit because I was on full throttle. They hit the tarmac and it ripped the tire clean off. So I actually did try to sort of glue this tire back on, but I'm missing a bit of tire on the inside that I didn't realize was missing, so I can't really use this one. But the tires themselves are not bad. I just wish the foams were a little bit better, and that's really about it. And just keep an eye out for ripping tires, because these things are quick, they are lightweight, and I think if ARRMA would just improve the quality of the rubber as well, just slightly, we may have less issues as well with the tires ripping apart or even coming off rims. There used to be an issue with tires coming off rims not too long ago, and I have seen or noticed that you don't see too much of that these days given the volume of cars that are out there. So they've definitely improved there. Now there's just a couple of other little tiny tweaks that they need to do in regards to that. The Senton, I also had a tire sort of rip apart, but that was because the tire had expanded and it clipped the body. and as soon as it clipped the body, a chunk of tyre just came clean off. So again, I can't really blame the car for that, but that was one where I was running 3-cell, and it was actually after the cameras had stopped rolling after I'd finished running the car for the first time. And that one I managed to put the tyre back on and glue it back, and it's been fine ever since. I've actually used the car a couple of more times since then, and thankfully the tyre hasn't ripped apart. So overall for handling, I think both cars perform exceptionally well. The tyres are good, the shocks are well tuned. They just got to tweak the leaky shocks a little bit, and perhaps introduce some better quality rubber in the future, and foams as well. But other than that, there's really not a lot to nitpick here, given that these are basher vehicles and the price point that they're at. I think ARRMA's done a very good job. So a 4 out of 5 for handling is a pretty solid score. And now we move on to everybody's favorite subject, durability. Now for durability, I have to give these cars really good marks, because they actually withstood a lot of my punishment, a lot of my bad driving, and a lot of my good driving as well. For durability for both cars, I've actually given these a 4 out of 5. I really don't have too much to complain about durability. The Senton probably performed a little bit better than the Typhon, to be honest. But aside from the tires getting cut up or leaky shocks, and of course the drive shafts being damaged, there's really not a lot that I can complain about. The cars have taken an enormous amount of punishment. The only thing that really broke on the Senton, or Typhon rather, was a link in the back section, like a tie rod link. That was because I took a huge jump over at the BMX track and landed on its side. I was expecting to have a lot more damage than that, and all I did was break a link. So it only cost me a few bucks. I put everything back together, and sure enough, the car's up and running again. So can't complain too much about the durability on these cars. The body on the Senton is actually a lot thicker than your conventional, stock bodies that you find on a lot of ready-to-runs out there. It took an absolute beating, and as you can see, it's still perfectly intact. It's got a couple of tears here and there, stuff that's taken some pretty big hits, but it's still very much usable, and same thing goes for the Typhon 3S. So I don't have too much to complain about with durability. I think ARRMA's done a really good job here, so well done to them. That's a 4 out of 5 for durability for both cars. As we start to wrap this up, we move on to maintenance. Now, maintenance is a category that I think some people get a little bit confused, because I really don't know what else to call this category, but it's really about the ease of use in the cars, the way that the chassis are designed, and also in regards to the initial setup out of the box. What maintenance did I have to do to the car prior to using it? Sometimes you get these brand new cars out of the box. First thing you got to do is you got to tune the shocks because they didn't fill them correctly, or you got to change tires because they're just completely useless, or you need to change gearing because they've undergeared the car out of the box, and so forth. So maintenance for me is also not only that, but it's also about how the overall layout of the car has been designed. Can you access the diffs reasonably well? Is the car, is there any thought being put into the ease of use, the end user? Can myself or you work on the car without, stressing and pulling our hair out, going, my God, why did they make it like this? It's so difficult to work on. So that's really what maintenance is about. It's not really about just, how often you have to maintain the vehicle. It's not so much about that. So hopefully that clears that up a little bit. Now for this score, I actually gave both cars a 4 out of 5 again. Now I'm going to explain to you why I did that. I think one of the things that kind of, I understand the thought mentality behind this design that ARRMA have done, but I think that the execution needs to be refined just ever so slightly. And I don't know, again, I know what the problem is, I don't know how to present the solution for this one. And that's really to do with the back module, the entire spur gear and motor mount assembly of the cars. ARRMA have very cleverly made it so that you only have to remove one screw and pull the red clip off to slide the entire power pod clean off the back of the car. The problem with that design is that dust and debris and tiny little beads of sand get stuck in those grooves and makes it really difficult to access those components. Not to mention, when everything is closed and sealed up, it's technically not really sealed. A few times I've seen where people actually have quite a significant amount of sand or dust inside the gear, so between the spur and the pinion gear. So there has to be something there that they may need to tweak a little bit just to improve that design and make it a little bit easier for us to access those components. Now, again, I don't know how to fix it. I just know that there is a little bit of a problem there. Now, it is more of an inconvenience than there is a deal breaker or anything like that. It's certainly not a deal breaker, far from it, but you do need to keep that in mind that when the cars are new, yeah, you can slide that clean out and it's very easy to work on. Once you start to use the cars and you get some dust and sand and so forth in those little slots, it does become a little bit tricky to remove, and it can be a little bit frustrating, especially for those of you who are a bit new to the hobby and probably expecting things to be a little bit easier than they really are, and you do need to sort of pry it open with a screwdriver or something to get some leverage and pull that entire motor mount off. So that's really my only concern here. Everything else as far as accessing diffs and so forth, I haven't had to do any of that, but based on the design of the car, there is going to be a little bit of digging to be done. The cars are built to a price point at the end of the day. They're not a conventional 1/8 scale car, and they're not a conventional short course truck. These are basher vehicles built to a price point, designed to be tough and fast. They're not race bred vehicles, so you're not really required to access your diffs in a short amount of time between race heats or anything like that. So I don't think ARRMA really gave that much thought into maintaining these cars. That's what the 6S line is designed for a little bit more easier access. But the 3S line, I think they've done a pretty good job, and for that I'm going to stick to a 4 out of 5 for maintenance on these cars. So now we're at the tail end of this review, and we're going to be talking about part support. Now, part support is a category that has, I think, some people divided on whether it's still relatively weak part support or has it gotten stronger. I can say that from my perspective, from my point of view here in Australia, part support has definitely improved for the ARRMA cars. In fact, it is better than some of the other brands out there at the moment. So well done ARRMA, well done Horizon Hobby, and well done to the Australian distributor as well for bumping up the numbers of parts for these cars. Not just the 3S line, but the 6S line, and of course now the 8S line as well. So good on them for doing that. It has taken a little bit of time. There's been a few hurdles, and for that I'm going to give this one a 4 out of 5 as well. No doubt it's only going to get better in the future, and I applaud everybody involved for making sure that we have stock, at least here in the country. I don't know what it's like in your part of the world. I know that some people are struggling still to get parts for these cars, while other parts of the world are in abundance with parts. Also, third-party part support has increased immensely. There are a lot of people out there making parts for these cars, not just RPM or T-Bone Racing, but there's a lot of independent individuals, guys just putting aluminium parts together, trying to get as much done as they can for those of us out there who really like to send these vehicles and really have a lot of fun with them to the absolute extreme. So good on them. Look forward to what part support is going to be like in another 12 months. So closing out the review now, we have value. And for value, again, I gave these cars a 4 out of 5. I think the only thing that really lets them down at the moment is the radio. And for that, I do have to deduct a point. There are a couple of tiny little things that you can always improve upon. Of course, the shock quality, not so much the shock performance, but the shock quality that these cars come with needs to improve ever so slightly. And I know some people out there are looking for alternatives, upgrading and so forth. But I think overall ARRMA have done a pretty fair job, and given the price point that these cars are, I think for value it's very much worthy of a 4 out of 5. Now, of course, that is just based on my opinion and my perspective here in the country. If you're in a different part of the world and these cars are more expensive than the competition, then that could be a little bit of a different story. But that I can't judge what these are going to be like in your country. I can only judge what these are like here in my country. So please understand that although we may not be in agreement, it doesn't necessarily mean that either of us are wrong. So that is my total review and score for these cars. For those of you playing at home, of course, the total for everything was 28 out of a potential 35, which equates to a total of 80%, which I think is a very solid and very good score for these cars, given that they've really only had one version, although they did have the Mega line out for a little while. The brushless version did get some upgrades, they did get some differences, compared to the Mega line. So it was really nice to see that ARRMA kind of hit the ground running with these cars, and no doubt they will only get better as time goes on and as new versions come out. So good on them for doing that. Good on to Horizon for making sure that these things are well supported around the world as well. I think the only thing that they really need to work on now is the radio, maintaining the high stock levels of part support for those of us out there who want that reassurance that we can get parts for these cars fairly quickly, so that we can of course keep using them. So I applaud everybody involved in bringing these out and doing everything they can for us to enjoy them. So thank you all. Thank you of course, and of course a big shout out to Horizon Hobby and ARRMA for sending out these cars for review. Really appreciate it, and I look forward to the next versions. That is it for this review. Thank you all very much for watching. If you enjoyed it, please be sure to give it a thumbs up. Don't forget to subscribe if you're new, and as always, check out the video description where I'll have more links in there to these cars. There'll be unboxings, running videos, and speed runs and so forth. You can watch a lot of content till your heart's content, and then you can probably subscribe and check out my social media pages as well. Thank you again. I'll speak to you all next time.